Hello everyone, welcome to First Chapter Friday. My name is Miss Linnae from the North Valleys Library, and today I'm going to read to you Dealing with Dragons. It's the first book in a series called The Enchanted Forest Chronicles, and it's written by Patricia C. Wrede, and the publisher, Harcourt Brace and Company, recommends this for 5th through 9th graders. But I will be honest, I read this for the first time as an adult, and between the action and the witty banter and the fractured fairy tales, I absolutely loved it. So here we go. Chapter 1, in which Cimmerian refuses to be proper and has a conversation with a frog. All right. Linderwall was a large kingdom, just east of the Mountains of Mourning, where philosophers were highly respected and the number 5 was fashionable. The climate was unremarkable. The knights kept their armor brightly polished, mainly for show, because it had been centuries since a dragon had come east. There were the usual periodic problems with royal children and uninvited fairy godmothers. But they were always the sort of thing that could be cleared up by finding the proper prince or princess to marry the unfortunate child a few years later. So all in all, Linderwall was a very prosperous and pleasant place. Cimmerian hated it. Now, Cimmerian was the youngest daughter of the king of Linderwall, and her parents found her to be rather trying. Their first 6 daughters were perfectly normal princesses with long golden hair and sweet dispositions, each more beautiful than the last. Cimmerian was lovely enough, but her hair was jet black, and she wore it in braids instead of curled and pinned like her sisters. And she couldn't stop growing. Her parents were quite sure that no prince would want to marry a girl who could look him in the eye instead of gazing up at him lovingly through her lashes. As for the girl's disposition, well, when people were being polite, they said she was strong-minded. But when they were angry or annoyed with her, they said she was as stubborn as a pig. Well, the king and the queen did the best they could. They hired the most superior tutors and governesses to teach Cimmerian all the things a princess ought to know: dancing, embroidery, drawing, and etiquette. There was a great deal of etiquette, from the proper way to curtsy before a visiting prince to how loudly it was permissible to scream when being carried off by a giant. Linderwall still had an occasional problem with giants. Well, Cimmerian found it all very dull, but she pressed her lips together and learned it anyway. When she couldn't stand it any longer, she would go down to the castle armory and bully the armsmaster into giving her a fencing lesson. As she got older, she found her regular lessons more and more boring. So consequently, the fencing lessons became more and more frequent. When she was 12, her father found out. "Fencing is not proper behavior for a princess," he told her in his gentle but firm tone, recommended by the court philosopher. Cimmerian tilted her head to one side. "Why not?" It's simply not done." Cimmerian considered. "Aren't I a princess?" "Yes, of course you are, my dear," said her father with relief. He had been bracing himself for a storm of tears, which was the way his other daughters reacted to reprimands. "Well, I fence," Cimmerian said with the air of one delivering an unshakable argument. "So it is too done by a princess." "That doesn't make it proper, dear," put in her mother gently. "Why not?" "It simply doesn't," the queen said firmly. And that was the end of Cimmerian's fencing lessons. When she was 14, her father discovered that she was making the court magician teach her magic. "How long has this been going on?" he asked wearily when she arrived in response to his summons. "Since you stopped the fencing lessons," Cimmerian said. "I suppose you're going to tell me it isn't proper behavior for a princess." "Well, yes. It isn't proper." "Nothing interesting seems to be proper," Cimmerian said. "You might find things more interesting if you applied yourself more, dear," Cimmerian's mother said. "I doubt it," Cimmerian muttered, but she knew better than to argue when her mother used that tone of voice. So that was the end of the magic lessons. The same thing happened over the Latin lessons from the court philosopher, the cooking lessons from the castle chef, the economics lessons from the court treasurer, and the juggling lessons from the court minstrel. Cimmerian began to grow rather tired of the whole business. So when she was 16, Cimmerian summoned her fairy godmother. "Cimmerian, my dear, this sort of thing really isn't done," the fairy said, fanning away the scented blue smoke that had accompanied her appearance. "People keep telling me that," Cimmerian said. "You should pay attention to them then," her godmother said irritably. "I'm not used to being hauled away from my tea without warning, and you aren't supposed to call me unless it is a matter of utmost importance to your life and future happiness." "It is of utmost importance to my life and future happiness," Cimmerian said. "Oh, very well. You're a bit young to have fallen in love already. Still, you always have been a precocious child. So tell me about him." Cimmerian sighed. "It isn't a him." "Oh, enchanted is he?" the fairy said with a spark of interest. "A frog, perhaps? That used to be quite popular, but it seems to have gone out of fashion lately. Nowadays all the princes are talking birds or dogs or hedgehogs." No, I'm not in love with anyone." "Then what exactly is your problem?" the fairy said in exasperation. "This!" Cimmerian gestured at the castle around her. "Embroidery lessons and dancing and being a princess." "My dear Cimmerian," the fairy said, shocked, "it's your heritage." "It's boring." "Boring?" The fairy did not appear to believe what she was hearing. "Boring. I want to do things, not sit around all day and listen to the court minstrel make up songs about how brave Daddy is and how lovely his wife and daughters are." "Nonsense, my dear. This is just a stage you're going through. You'll outgrow it soon, and you'll be very glad you didn't do anything rash." Cimmerian looked at her godmother suspiciously. "You've been talking to my parents, haven't you?" "Well, they do try to keep me up to date on what my godchildren are doing." "I thought so," said Cimmerian, and bade her fairy godmother a polite goodbye. A few weeks later, Cimmerian's parents took her to a tourney in Satham by the Mountains, the next kingdom over. Cimmerian was quite sure that they only were taking her because her fairy godmother had told them that something had better be done about her, and soon. She kept this opinion to herself because anything was better than the endless rounds of dancing and embroidery lessons at home. However, Cimmerian realized her mistake almost as soon as they reached their destination, because the king of Satham by the Mountains had a son. He was a golden-haired, blue-eyed, and exceedingly handsome prince whose duties appeared to consist entirely of dancing attendance on Cimmerian. Isn't he handsome? Cimmerine's lady-in-waiting sighed. Yes, Cimmerian said without enthusiasm. Unfortunately, he isn't anything else. Whatever do you mean? The lady-in-waiting said in astonishment. Well, he has no sense of humor. He isn't intelligent. He can't talk about anything except tourneys, and half of what he does say, he gets it wrong. I'm glad we're only staying 3 weeks. I don't think I could stand to be polite to him for much longer than that. But what about your engagement? The lady-in-waiting cried, horrified. What engagement? Cimmerian said sharply. The lady-in-waiting tried to mutter something about a mistake, but Cimmerian put up her chin in her best princess fashion and insisted on an explanation. Finally, the lady-in-waiting broke down. I overheard their majesties discussing it yesterday. She sniffled into her handkerchief. The stipulations and covenants and contracts and settlements have all been drawn up, and they're going to sign them the day after tomorrow and announce it on Thursday. I see, said Cimmerian. Well, thank you for telling me. You may go. The lady-in-waiting left, and Cimmerian went to see her parents. They were annoyed and a little embarrassed to find that Cimmerian had discovered their plans, but they were still very firm about it. We were going to tell you tomorrow when we signed the papers, her father said. We knew you'd be pleased, dear, her mother said, nodding. He's such a good-looking boy. But I don't want to marry Prince Thranduil, Cimmerian said. Well, it's not exactly a brilliant match, Cimmerian's father said, frowning, but I didn't think you'd care how big his kingdom is. It's the prince I don't care for, Cimmerian said. Well, that's a great pity, dear, but it can't be helped, Cimmerian's mother said placidly. I'm afraid it isn't likely that you'll be getting another offer. Well, then I won't get married at all. Both of her parents looked slightly shocked. My dear Cimmerian, said her father, that's out of the question. You're a princess, and it simply isn't done. I'm too young to get married. Your great-aunt Rose was married at 16, her mother pointed out. One really can't count all those years she spent asleep under that dreadful fairy's curse. I won't marry the Prince of Salem by the mountains, Cimmerian said desperately. It isn't proper. What? Said both of her parents together. I mean, he hasn't rescued me from a giant or an ogre or freed me from a magic spell, Cimmerian said. Both of her parents looked uncomfortable. Well, no, said Cimmerian's father. It's a bit late to start arranging it, but we might be able to manage something. I don't think it's necessary, Cimmerian's mother said. She looked reprovingly at Cimmerian. You've never paid attention to what was or wasn't suitable before, dear. You can't start now. Proper or not, you will marry Prince Thranduil 3 weeks from Thursday. But, Mother, I'll send the wardrobe mistress to your room to start fitting you for your bride clothes, Cimmerian's mother said firmly, and that was the end of the conversation. So, if you'd like to read the rest of this and find out whether she marries Thranduil or how she's going to meet the dragons, you can go to the Washoe County Library System's website and find out the various ways you can access this book. We even have the ebook and the downloadable audiobook. And like I said, it's part of a series. Here is Searching for Dragons, Calling on Dragons, and Talking to Dragons. It's a great little series, and I hope you will enjoy it as much as I did. Thank you very much for coming today.